So, FYI, I had to re-record. I just finished, a couple days ago, doing what I felt was a decent, kind of exhaustive, just a kind of regular review, which I try to which I try to keep up. And I found out by the end of it that the entire time I was using, or was not using rather, this microphone. So this was plugged in, and I had this kind of in mind to do because I'm spread off in so many different directions, spreading myself way too thin. But I had this microphone plugged in, but it was like over there, so like the entire time the audio was like completely canned and awful. So excuse that, and excuse because for the whole time I felt like I was like, damn it, I thought I got a pretty exhaustive review of Bruno Schulz and a kind of a take on his different life contributions, but now I'm gonna have to do that all over again. Repeat the magic. Well, there's not really much magic. It's not. It's me just kind of rambling incoherently part of the time. So excuse that in advance, and I will try to kind of get back into what I remember, because the biggest thing with me is not really the kind of the big picture, the themes and the stuff from that, but it's mostly the kind of like the life events, the trajectory of life events. Like, when did he do that, or like when did he move from this country to that country? I'm not too good with that, so I have some notes on my phone. I just find it a little bit easier just to put my phone, just because. Anyway, but so the main thing with Bruno Schulz, so he was born in 1892, and he is an interesting kind of conglomeration of different cultures. He was part Austrian. He was part in the Austrian of what was then back in the day the Austrian Galicia, I believe, Empire, which is so. I'm gonna have to kind of. I'm probably gonna butcher some of these names. Probably most of them. So that was now historically it was the part of Poland in the kingdom at the time, and then there's 3 partitions, I think, which is now part of Ukraine. So you have an interesting kind of. I noticed that with a lot of different artists and stuff, that especially ones that I've taken a kind of liking to, like Milan Kundera. You have him in a similar, almost a kind of similar kind of Czech area, born into kind of the Soviet kind of grappling with the USSR and the Soviet kind of all that kind of falling apart. In him seeing his not really having the artistic freedoms and longings that he had so pined for throughout his life, and now finally he was able to kind of spend most of his life I believe in France. So, and then also with famously with James Joyce too, which I still have Ulysses right here. I keep forgetting to do this because I'm not Ulysses. Finnegan's Wake. They're not the same book. They're totally different books. Totally. One of this is like Within Dreaming. It's like the entire book is a modernist proposal on the trajectory of getting up from waking life, in our addition, not just in a Richard Linklater kind of way, but in just a way of trying to propose. It's like a dissertation almost, on very 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 experimental, and it's so the reason I'm it's because it's such a well known book, and a lot of I don't want to say snobs, but kind of I'm totally not a snob, I'm not totally a lit snob, but people who take who are kind of very what's the word, pedantic about things. They'll be like, oh, this is the bet, like you guys who think that that Finnegan's Wake is part kind of madness or madness inducing, like you don't know anything about literature, so I'm gonna have to say that for a different day. Anyway, and on top of that too, my computer is also getting repaired as well, so not that you guys care about that, because it's like, by the time this uploads, by the time I even kind of cobble this together, this will probably be a couple days in advance, so by that time I'm hoping my computer will be upgraded and not the slow dinosaur kind of era computer that I've had for the past literally 10 years. I've had very little upgrades on it. I've just been awful with that, despite me trying to generally being pretty, this stuff and the mediums and stuff that I've been playing with are actually quite abreast with the times, and they're like, it's like video content and various kinds of expressions and stuff like that, which you would think would warrant good computer software and hardware inbuilt to that, and a nice CPU and a very nice video card, which I did get a few years back, but I've only gotten small little doses of those things, and I'm just ready to kind of have it revamped to the point where it's basically an Odysseus' ship, instance of selfhood being replaced by selfhood, and a kind of imperialistic. I don't know if that's David Hume's kind of empiricism, or I don't know, whatever whatever idea of the self, I guess, is what probably Locke said, something to the effect of the self is the consistent kind of container of what has these main traits. And anyway, but I don't know why I just got that. I was just listening to some different, vaguely lecture series type stuff. None of them in a kind of chronology, but in just single type things. That's what I do. I need to kind of listen to more, commit to different series more. But I do like I think it's the Tom. I don't know what the name of the guy is. He did a really great thing on Heidegger and Kierkegaard and either or and all that. But I'm definitely gonna have to stop talking about that stuff and then get to Bruno Schulz. So Bruno Schulz, he was born at the time what was in now occupied. By the time the 30s came around, it was now the Union, and he had a really tragic lifestyle. Well, he didn't come. His father was a cloth merchant, and you see his father, the figure of his this man that is embodied in his literature, that Schulz takes and kind of commemorates in a way of like saying that he was a strange, eccentric man, or at least that's the father that we see portrayed throughout this part imaginary, part kind of real, mundane, tedious world that you get with kind of cloth merchants and mercantile people, and having to in this you get a lot of like metropolitan kind of closely cobbled or isolated together, not isolated, but closely, you get the idea of, you get the kind of image of like apartment buildings that are like melded together and in kind of this very closely knitted cities where like the poverty was probably a big thing. With like I'm not sure to what extent Schulz grew up in poverty, or if he did at all. I do know that he was able to go to something called the Liv Polytechnic, which is a school, because he excelled in multiple different disciplines. He was good with the kind of the spoken word. He was good at oracularly or orally rather, recounting his stories like he did he actually was at one point he was a teacher, and he kept getting he was supposed to be teaching kind of an art class, I believe, or kind of from the textbook and the curriculum had supplied, but he ended up breaking out in like an enthusiastic, animated kind of joie vivre, of just like and of like from entirely on the spot, just like in improvising stories. So he was very adept at that, and he ended up using all those kind of skills. That, and then also his more probably public kind of thing, because nowadays I think his writings are now resurfacing, and that's the kind of the beauty of Schulz's work, is that it keeps on bits and pieces of it we get are like brought up, and the fragmented bits are brought up into the pieces of the whole. Whereas I think his most front facing kind of discipline was that brought him probably the most kind of I don't want to say notoriety, but the most maybe not only with the Germans, I suppose that was the only kind of notoriety what he got, but the most kind of promise in a career as far as a what's the word, handsome salary, I guess, would be his talents for mural making and the visual arts, being like I think he was not only was he an adept, accomplished painter, but he was also a dexterous, I believe. I think he also sculpted a bit too. But you have all these different kind of emblems, all these different kind of expressions and facets of his personality that bring his this world of the Nocturnal Apparitions, which is the only thing I've read so far. He had another one called Sanitarium, which I've only just ordered. So I thought I ordered it sooner, but I'm pretty new to the world of Bruno Schulz. I think I might have mentioned this is my first one by him, and I've just finished this like maybe a couple weeks ago, maybe last week. And I think with I do know that he was greatly indebted to Kafka, and there's also some one of the stories was actually called The Cockroach in this too, not the Ian McEwan one, but the that which is that's more about Brexit, but anyway, but this one is very obviously a homage to Kafka in his talking about like his father, saying that his father woke up one morning to find himself as a one of those verminous kind of bugs like a cockroach scuttling across the table or the cellar floor, kind of, this image of just like total like Kafkaesque total this combination of a will and to continue to carry on despite this newfound kind of existential configuration to something completely unlike what you are, and that could be taken as a religious kind of thing. It could have been a cultural kind of ethnic standpoint of feeling isolated, but that definitely was both of them, the two of them, Kafka and Bruno Schulz, were, I believe, Jews, and kind of were somewhat not contemporaries, but I think Kafka was about 10 years older. He was born in 1882 or 3, I think 83, and he and obviously he passed away from tuberculosis, and the difference is that Schulz passed away tragically from an SS, a very power-hungry, specifically awful, inhumane, which is saying something, SS officer who ended up taking and his name's not worth remembering at this point. I don't even know if anybody really, what kind of brigade or what kind of squadron he belonged to, but I believe that this particular SS officer was the same one who basically enslaved and forced Schulz during the Holocaust, during the kind of to put this in perspective, he did die in 1942, so this is like right kind of in the heat of the war. He had three more years left to go, and this is kind of right when the Germans were at their most kind of just power baiting, hungry for just like just fiendishly like awful. Like they were taking, I believe they used Schulz to. He made a deal with him as to like he could continue to supply him with rations if he kept making these murals for him, and each of these murals had to be a specific kind of thing that would be very propagandistic and very obviously a skewered kind of version of what Schulz normally did, which is actually a kind of mix between a exotic kind of the name's kind of lost to me. The kind of style that he had, but it's like a mix between prose poetry of like the imagination, the spellbound kind of imagination, and kind of an exotic kind of there's like a eroticism. That's the thing, which makes me think it's almost kind of a modernist, almost kind of a little bit like a Baudelaire kind of decadence too. Like which is the kind that maybe Nietzsche found himself unimpressed with. He wasn't exactly all that impressed with this idea of kind of total decadence and like kind of moving outside, like moving, not having any in particular challenging goals, but in the way that I think the eroticism that Schulz said was more of a kind of a sensual kind of longing. It's kind of exploring into this idea of the kept woman or the loose woman or the maid servants that, or in a similar way that Kafka kind of uses this image of the character in America, which is kind of his most funniest comical book. Really, it was a book comic of manners. Really, that was very much in the same kind of spirit of Charles Dickens, who he felt himself to be indebted to, and I believe with that character of the 18-year-old boy, he was shipped off to America. I think the inciting incident for that was that he had a affair with this older maidservant. So that was like that kind of made his parents like very just kind of like fearful for him and his health, and he just wanted to get him out of there. So I guess that was kind of the out of sight, out of mind kind of mentality. But yeah, that was kind of that kind of I'm not sure how to put my finger on it, what exactly it is, but it's this. It's not just kind of it's this mixture between an innocent of a childlike imagination, which showed in the way that Schulz taught his kids. You know, he would improvise stories, but in another hand, he would also have combined that with and it's like a bit of a cliche saying that it's just the sacred and the profane, because I think that kind of takes away reduces it. It's a bit reductive, like it's not really fully giving the full a thorough side of the whole of his character. And I'm still trying to learn this and figure this stuff out. So, but with Schulz, it's an interesting kind of thing with him because he's combining those opposite enantiodromia, kind of Jungian, I guess you could say, things that you would think aren't compatible. Like these things can't really cohort, don't really agree with one another. Like super, like kind of almost smutty, what you might say, mixed with this kind of that kind of uncensored kind of thing. And that's kind of what like even landed kind of D.H. Lawrence kind of in a censorship position too. So you can imagine that even the modernist writers and Joyce too, like knock on wood, also had to kind of deal with that kind of stuff with Ulysses, with the scenes of, I think, with like masturbation and self-pleasure near the end. That was actually more or less hinted at in a way, I think, but I'm not too sure. I'm just trying to think, because it's like during the time you'd think. So I think what happened with Schulz's his life, he ended up having to piece himself together and find any way to kind of express himself without being subject to scrutiny. And I think he was able to do that. But it was at a cost, I think. So he lived, I think, a pretty fairly undisturbed life until the Nazis kind of invaded all of Europe and got super morbidly obsessed with more and more power hungry, and this idea of like a warped kind of Nietzschean kind of way of the idea that especially with the Russians too, like the slavish, because like Slavic means slave, so they thought they were going to be the slave class, so that's what they sent out all these ex-convict Nazi criminals, basically these that they sent them to, that I think the SS, I think I don't know if it's Goebbels was in charge of taking these people and sending them, or ex-convicts, and then putting them all together in a brigade to kind of go around Europe and to basically wreak havoc, which is what the entire movie Come and See kind of has. A big part of that movie, Come and See, by Elem Klimov, is very much based in the Ales Ademovich story of I think it's called the Katzen Fire, the fires of Katzen, in that little village that he was very personal to him in this story. And now I know I'm getting way off track. And then I also was going to mention too, like Emil Chorin, his maybe perhaps leaving Romania despite being bored there, but yet harboring certain or interjecting certain aspects of his personality that grew up there too. You see that with composers too, like Arvo Parto. Maybe growing up in a certain place and not really being beholden to that place. I don't know. I find that interesting. Because I'm struggling with that kind of aspect of my identity. Like, am I, like I'm an American, yes, but I feel very much like just through virtue of reading and vicariously, like I'm living through a million and one different worlds of that. I can all choose from, and I thought I had my phone. Okay, sorry. Excuse me. My phone just fell to the side here, so now you can tell this whole thing is quite organically. Stuff is for all it's upside down. What did Schulz do? What did he write about with the? Now, these are different kind of, they're very different kind of, collections of that he had. So one of the collections were he had the cinnamon shop, I believe. It was called Street of Crocodiles. So that was one of the stories. So this is so it's hard to describe, but basically with Bruno Schulz is that there was a kind of two different there's multiple different kind of books and releases and short collections of short stories released not just in his lifetime, but one of those was the Street of Crocodiles was actually, I believe, that the Brothers Quay actually had a modern. When I say modern, I actually mean just like I think the 70s or 80s. I believe they adapted that short story, which is a very kind of funny, kind of humorous story about this street that's taken over by these kind of semi-sentient crocodiles, and they're all kind of vying for control over it. And you see a lot of that. I believe this was the only one that this was different because this one was published during his lifetime. So this is something that he compiled in the 20s and maybe 30s, and then it was published in 1933. Whereas the other one, the one that I read, actually converges because there are stories that are contained in both of those collections that I might have read. So, and then some of them that I haven't read yet. So, as I try to make sense of this, in the but there's also, if you just look up too, you have all sorts of interesting kind of illustrations by Bruno Schulz too. I might, if I feel compelled, I might actually take some of his illustrations and kind of put them in there. But I also want to maybe see if there is some interesting, any quotes by, on the Crocodile Street, I believe. So, one of them, he said, "My ideal goal is not to mature into childhood. That would be genuine maturity. My idea is to mature into childhood." Okay, so I'm sorry. That I actually remember. I do remember that quote. I'm not sure at what point he said that, but it's just he keeps going kind of back and forth between a part of him wanting to kind of please his father, and then on the other hand, he also kind of portrays his father as a bit of an eccentric kind of goofball that's like jumping up and down and himself as a child. So there's a bit of a carnivalesque kind of Dostoevsky sentiment to this, is that maybe everybody has this capacity to just let go and be childlike rather than childish. There's a big difference, discrepancy between those. But yes, so there are, he also said, there are things that cannot even ever occur with any precision. They're too big and too magnificent to be contained in mere facts. They are merely trying to occur. They are checking whether the ground of reality can carry them, and they withdraw, fearing them, losing their integrity and the frailty of realization. So again, you have this kind of depiction of like the freedom of like imagination, and then something Fernando Pessoa talked about too is like this idea of like him being so committed to dreams and on that half waking state between dreams and reality, constantly cusping on the cusp of that line, on that threshold, never fully like engaging with life, never being a normal person, never being just like, like going around and, like just being like a normal kind of person, and maybe in the way that his father was, I'm talking about Schulz's father and a cloths merchant, as noble as a career that might be, and as much love and fondness as he seems to have had for him, I think there's I think there's more of a, like this idea that there's so much freedom that one can find in the imagination, especially the unrestrained, and just allowing it to flourish completely. So the in the particular collection of stories that he published in 1933, talks about kind of a little bit of that same Galician town of, I believe, Drohobych, I believe. There's a lot of there's almost like folklore to it as well. I'm just gonna check to see if this is still recording. Okay, like I said, there's a lot of folklore to this story collection as well, with Schulz kind of engaging in a part internal monologue and part in kind of like the kind of it's almost like Blakean visionary kind of stuff, the kind of stuff you might see in the Songs of Innocence and Experience, I believe, and this kind of Urizen kind of like, you know, a very prophetic almost use of Christian imagery, but also like a combination of that with like a fiery kind of, and also a very like suggestive kind of paradoxical twisting of up and down of stuff like the marriage in heaven and hell, you know, and that's what's something I'd like to do next here some of these days. So there's that, but then there's also kind of a there's a lot of this reality of stuff, like for example his father turning into a cockroach, and then it like the next second he's like it's very kind of ephemeral how it happens, and it's like but a lot of this stuff is skewered through imagination, and like it's a way of almost coping with maybe the boredom of life, maybe just the which I identify with a lot, but I think one of them is, you know, like I said, the father, the archetype of the father in his character is this, he runs, he also has a kind of shun, his father takes on a lot of different qualities. Like one of them is he's a cloth merchant who's running this textile kind of mercantile business, and then another part he's like this, able to kind of shift between this almost godlike, like he's almost able to, I think there's like a weird kind of omniscience too, like he's not omniscience, but a kind of superhuman quality, like he turns into a very preternatural kind of thing, and it almost reminded me a little bit of I can't remember, remember the book, it was also by Chuck Arthur, but it was I believe the same person who did Being There, and the Jerzy Kaczynski. It was called The Painted Bird. I think I actually did a review on this a little bit ago. The Painted Bird deals with a similar thing, with this little boy surviving World War II and the torments of it, and obvious anguish, and using folklore and like this, like piecing together the fragments of all of his life, using that, and then imagination and this stuff, which reminds me a lot of one of my favorite movies of all time, Life is Beautiful, which has which came out in '97, but it seems like it's been around like for like 40 years. It's like, but Life is Beautiful, which is directed by, it's the Italian movie. It's about the Jewish Italian guy, but it's about Guido. But it was so it was by Roberto Benigni. But anyway, but it's a pretty famous movie. I think I remember vaguely watching it when I grew up. But using this idea of like the idea of the imagination, using that to kind of escape and to allow to using one's wit to kind of cover up and to kind of make things like easier for your child, because no child in my mind, and obviously in the mind of the main character, would want to go through this horrors of being kept away in an internment camp, and and this idea of making it seem like the guards are all in on a game of hide and seek is like very, I don't know, that's very there's something of a, one might say it's like, oh, it's like taking away the horrors of war, and it's like kids, it's like you should just live with the fact that that war is hell, and I don't think that's emotionally, I don't think it's healthy for anyone, even especially kids. Like, you're going through such a fractious, that's when most of your emotional and mental maturity is going through a lot of like major fluctuations and plasticity and all that, neuroplasticity, and is like, that's when it's biggest when that's when kids are most liable to be like precocious about things. Like, that's when they're most liable to be to develop most of their skills and areas of expertise learned later on, entrenched in later on in life. But that's just my kind of pop psychology. Anyway, but to go back to Bruno Schulz, just kind of tie this up. But yeah, so there's also a symbol of a servant girl named Adela or Agela, who has a very kind of domineering kind of attitude, and like she kind of gets what she wants. And there's also she ends up kind of playing the father character to her. Kind of like ends up like threatening him and using him for her own advantages, and there's instances where she's like using kind of like in contact with the birds as well, and kind of like, and has her kind of driving them away with a broom, and that's kind of this idea of like, I don't know, this again like a folklore kind of very folkish kind of wisdom, I think, is embedded in the story. Like you see kind of, it's almost like this idea of using kind of Schulz's recognizing patterns or things in his own culture that he might have embedded. To what extent, I'm not sure, but this is just what I kind of suspect, is that he's maybe using traces of that vestigial kind of folk imagery, and then but obviously using much of it to his own kind of, his like powered by his own imagination, because it's probably the biggest factor in this book. So yes. Then I'm gonna kind of maybe read out a little bit of what there was the chapters for the Nocturnal Apparitions. I'm sorry, which is the one I read, and it so the first chapter. I'm sorry for my phone to load. First chapter for this was so it was August, and then the second story was Visitations, and then the third was Birds. Now, mind you, some of these were like literally a few minutes, so it's kind of hard to kind of like figure out what like where each one of them ended and the other one began. But there was Cinnamon Shops, which I loved. There's this his father in that one is kind of like, it's like it's very kind of auspicious for a child to be growing up in a cinnamon shop, and you can imagine the scents and the smell. That that's a big factor for Schulz too, is a kind of, not just it's easy for some people to write him off, I think, as man, I'm dying for that word again. It's not exotic. It's not esoteric. It's sensual. It's like, it's as if it's sexual provocative. People write him off as if that was his career. Not everybody. I'm just maybe critics of him. So it's just his critics. But he had a very kind of this childlike sentiment of the importance of like sensuality, not just in completely free of sex. It's not like that's not like, now you do get images of that. Like in the final one of that was if it will load, the final one was called Ungela, and that I'm wondering too, because I'm wondering whether the name has any ties to a kind of a Latin root kind of word for undulating, to kind of oscillate, or to kind of, I'm not sure, pombinate, I guess might be the word, buzz, something that is, to kind of go buzz about. I don't know. I'm not sure whether or not Angela, how much of that was intense or it was intentional, but I do know that with the character of Angela was supposed to be a servant lady that he kind of harbors, that the narrator, who's never really in fact, in this version of this particular story, they felt like it kind of warranted its own kind of introduction. It's saying it was a great. So this story is quite different because it's at the end, and it's like it's quite different from these other ones. These other ones are something that you might read to your child. Like you might read like one of the stuff that he read to his own students. But this kind of story, on the other hand, is a lot different. It's gonna kind of veer into a more troubling, kind of more lonely, despondent kind of like a kind of longing, or like a limerence for someone. It's like this of the confused feelings that one might have for someone who's like a little bit loose and like this, maybe even like lower, I guess. and it doesn't have anything all that explicit in it, as far as I recall. But Angela is kind of strongly hinted as being kind of a kept woman, and in the sense that I got a little bit of parallels to the Book of Monel by Marcel Schwob, who is a French symbolist poet, and he had a very kind of rare book, kind of maybe not all that rare. I think he was kind of held in esteem by other authors, like later on by him, like I think like Horhess. I think I'm not sure, but I have heard some other reviews, and I obviously didn't stumble upon him by accident. That's I've heard people talk about Schwob as kind of a token of obscure books that are worth the read, and it's not too big of a book. It's like this thick. It's maybe 150 pages. But yeah, I loved. It's this idea. I think it was Monel was based very much on a real woman that Schwob knew. I don't know if that was her real name, but she was strongly implied to be a prostitute, and she ended up dying quite young. I'm not sure if it was some kind of a syphilitic infection, or whether or not that was a tuberculosis issue, which is very rampant during the day. And yeah, that this idea of like a lost love, of a love so young being lost to time, and that being etched in the indelibly in someone's heart forever, is just completely, that's the kind of thing that kind of reminded me of, that's very, very potent, and that's the kind of stuff that lasts. So, and then like I said with Schulz's stuff, it's like we're still getting more layers to his personality, and his and not only his new stuff, like his new murals and stuff showing up, but that are pretty popular to the point where I think like Hillary Clinton I think visited in person one of the I think I heard one of the kind of official translators. I heard in an interview he did. I'll try to give you guys a link to that. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, this idea that his legacy is like still pretty discernible. It's there, it's on the radar, but on the same time, his other stuff, like his books and his other various works, are still kind of coming up and kind of arising, because the Nazis did I guess they did like a pretty exhaustive enough job of kind of wiping his stuff out, and making it like it was Samizdat, or some kind of like Jewish kind of something being so obscene and not able to be read, and I guess they kind of maybe they just wrote him off as kind of another Jewish gypsy that wasn't worth anything, and they're like, well, he's worth just making these propagandistic murals, and we're just gonna shoot him. So that's what happened. In a fit of rage, that SS officer ended up shooting Bruno Schulz at the age of about, I think he just turned 50. So we could have gotten a good deal more, just like we could have gotten a good deal more with Kafka or with Flannery O'Connor, hadn't it been for lupus. And yeah, this I guess, I don't know, I'm just gonna keep going on and about different tangential related character or authors and writers and whatnot, and I think I'll just end it there. But on a personal note, I have actually slowly working my way through Oliver Sacks' Awakening. Oliver Sacks' Awakening. His 1970s book was pretty famous, and I'd like to watch the movie eventually when I'm done with that, and I'd like to do a review of it. And I did read a couple years back, I think, it was one of the... it was Orlando by Virginia Woolf, which I'd like to do some of these days. A biography by Virginia Woolf. I'd like to do a review on that, and obviously Finnegan's Wake. Yeah, I actually got it right that time. But for now, that's all I have for Bruno Schulz. I definitely recommend him. Wherever you start, I just make sure that you I don't know, or maybe there's a kind of a joy to rereading the same story twice, because I think even if I do get another different version of, or a different collection of poetries or prose poems and stories, I might be pleasantly surprised by seeing the same thing as I am with Kafka, as I am with rereading Redmond the Ape for like the 5th time, because that's such a great Great one. But yeah, that's all I have for Bruno Schulz, and thank you for watching.